One of the hardest things to do is to unlearn something. Once you've learned something, it sticks in there and it's really hard to make it go away. That can be a good thing, but it can also be a really bad thing if the thing that you've learned is wrong. When I talk to people about school district budgets, they often have a mental model or a metaphor in mind that I used to have myself that we have to unlearn. I call it the pile and bucket model of school budgeting, and it's wrong. But here's how it works. Actually, here's how it doesn't work. There's a big pile of money, and there are little buckets. The pile represents all the funding that the school has, and the budgeting process is simply a matter of taking the funding and dividing it up by salary, power bill, bus, cafeteria, etc. This model, it's very simple, but it's very wrong. It's much more complex than that, but I think we can come up with a metaphor that'll make it more understandable. The bucket and pile metaphor is especially unhelpful because it doesn't take into account two critical components of school budgets, and those components are uncertainty and time. The first two noble truths of school budgeting are as follows. Number one, we don't know how much money we will have, and number two, we don't know what our expenses will be. So the art of school budgeting, and I think it is more of an art than a science, is not about how well you can sort money. It's about how well you can predict how much might come in and how well you can predict how much might go out. But the truth is, you don't know either of those things up front. I always feel a little bit bad for school business officials when someone asks them how much money is in the budget. As a school business official, you should know that, right? Well, a good school business official knows that there's no answer to that question, that at any moment that number can change, and so they often seem equivocal. It's not because they don't know what they're doing, it's because they do know what they're doing. I would like to propose that we replace the pile and bucket metaphor with the railroad metaphor. The idea is this: there are two kinds of railroad cars. Cars that weigh something and cars that carry the fuel so the train can move. A school budget is a lot like that. You got money and you have expenses. Here is how the railroad metaphor addresses the issue of uncertainty. You don't know how much weight you're going to have to pick up, and you don't know how much fuel you're going to have access to as you travel down the railroad track. We've seen how the railroad metaphor addresses the concept of uncertainty. Now let's take a look at how it addresses the concept of time. With a school budget, time is hugely important, and we always have to plan 3 years in advance. As you can see, we're in the school year 2019-2020, and then we'll go into 2021, 21-22. So we're always planning in advance. That's how we account for time. And you can see that as we go down the track, there's uncertainty out there. Will we be able to get more money, more fuel? Will we have to pick up a greater load, more weight? And so the budget manager is always having to make these good guesses. Now, let me ask you this question. When you look down here and you see that red question mark 2 years from now, that question mark might go like this: what's the cost of healthcare going to be? Do you think you could answer that? You can see why uncertainty is a big part of that and why time is such an important thing to take into consideration. Prior to 2016, we were motoring along quite nicely with plenty of fuel, in fact, more fuel than we were using. So when we got to subsequent years, that fuel began to pile up at the station. Because of increases in local property taxes and the increase in property values, our fuel continued to grow while the cargo was staying about the same size. In those days, we'd be motoring along in the land of uncertainty, and suddenly what might happen is we'd find more funds. We'd get a grant, or we would get increase in property taxes because someone sold an expensive home, and the fuel cars were outnumbering the load cars. And so, back at the station, they began to pile up. Schools are not like other businesses. If you're Apple Computer and you're starting to stockpile money like that, what happens is you might pay a bigger dividend to your shareholders. You might invest in something new. You might do something with it. But schools aren't supposed to do that. We're not supposed to stockpile money. We don't have shareholders. What we want to do, our goal, is to make sure that we're using every single dollar to the best possible effect to help children learn and grow every day. Using a transparent strategic planning process, our school board increased expenditures to create better outcomes for students. I think that our board did this in a really responsible and thoughtful way. They added a pre-K program. Very few public schools fund a pre-K program right out of their general fund. They funded field trips. In order to attract and retain the best teachers and classified employees, they offered salary increases. They didn't just offer them, they negotiated them with their 2 unions. They offered professional development far in excess of what most schools do in order to make sure we have the best school we can have. Now, if there's a territory that the train is going through, it is called the land of uncertainty. And we weren't exactly sure, but we had a good idea that there may be some cost savings that would let us run at a deficit for a little while. And sure enough, that happened. If you remember back to the first interim budget report in the fall, we had lost 2 positions and now budgeted for a balanced budget where our fuel and our weight was just about the same. And that's the position we were in last fall. Things have changed a little bit as we head into second interim report this spring. Let's talk about another noble truth of the school budgeting process, and that is this. Cost always goes up. No matter what you do, your costs are going to increase. 3 of the most significant cost increases each year are salaries, benefits, and contributions to the retirement systems, both for teachers and for classified employees. Even if we don't negotiate a raise with our employee groups, salary still goes up because of step and column. The longer you work, the more money you get paid. As we continue on our journey through the land of uncertainty, we can sometimes make statements, but we can only make them in the present given the information we have. So today is February 23rd, 2019, and I think that we are running a budget deficit. In fact, I'm pretty confident that we are. That means that we have not enough fuel to carry the train that we have hooked up. However, back at the station, there is enough fuel to keep going in subsequent years. If we don't reduce the number of red cars or find some way to add more blue cars, which is always really hard to do, our reserve is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're going to have to do something a little bit different, and the good news is we have time to do it. One thing I want to make sure I mention, and I know my business officials are probably like kind of screaming at me from the other side of the screen, is that this is an oversimplification. There's some key elements of school budgeting that I didn't mention in my attempt to try to keep it simple. The one thing I will mention is that there's something called restricted money. Not all of the blue cars can be used to fuel all of the red cars, but I thought that was a little bit too complex to get into today. Some money is earmarked for specific things. But besides that, I hope that's been helpful. And this just in fact, I had to re-edit this video to tell you something. Don't you love it when you're walking down the street and you find a big pile of money, say $166,000 sitting right there on the sidewalk, and you get to keep it? Isn't that amazing? That's never happened to me. Actually, it kind of happened last week because I heard from our county office that the Bolinas Stinson School District probably qualifies for a grant of that amount. So this is going to be helpful. And it is almost as though the state of California wanted to help me make the point about uncertainty of school budgets. That's money we couldn't count on during the first interim budget report. I think we'll be able to count on it by the time the second rolls around. It's good news, but the truth is you never know what's going to happen, except that costs are going to go up. So I hope you found this informative, and please come to board meetings, come to the budget committee meetings. They're all posted on the website, and download the Bolinas Stinson app. Check out the new website too, it's beautiful. Thanks.